Well, thank you for joining us because it is Wednesday, June 2nd, 20 and 21. So here's some big events, some good events, some things I'm interested in on this date. 1835, P.T. Barnum's circus started its first tour of the United States. In 1862, Robert E. Lee takes command of the armies of Northern Virginia. I love Robert E. Lee, great godly man, amazing general. 1875, Alexander Graham Bell does the first sound transmission. So that's what we're doing in honor of him today. In 1883, the first night baseball game is played, 1883, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Isn't that interesting? Back to baseball, in 1935, Babe Ruth, they named a candy bar after him, at the age of 40, announces his retirement from baseball. In 1953, this is good, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II takes place in Westminster Abbey, 1953, a few days ago. So here's some birthdays on this date. 1904, Johnny Weissmuller. Yes, that Johnny Weissmuller, the one who won 5 Olympic gold medals between 1924 and 1928 and was the original Tarzan, at least in the movies. Well, he was born in Friedorf, Romania. He ended up dying in 1984. 1972, not that famous, but Wayne Brady, a comedian. You might have seen him on the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? And he was born in Columbus, Georgia in 1972. Here's some deaths on this date. 1941, Lou Gehrig. He had been involved in 6 World Series and twice was the American League MVP. He died of course, Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a motor neuron disease. He was 37 when he died, so young, that's sad. 2012, Richard Dawson, yes, Hogan's Heroes. He had esophageal cancer and he was 79 years old when he passed away. So let's think about another psalm today. We're looking at Psalm 71. It's titled A Prayer of Trust because that's what it is. It's a prayer of trust. And a couple things that you'll see in verses 1 through 3, an unnamed aged writer cries out for help. Now we call him an unnamed aged writer because we'll find out later he's older, but he's not named. In the Hebrew text, there's no attribute to who wrote this, so we really don't know. However, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament Hebrew, so it's the Old Testament in the Greek, has a tradition, and they say that it was David, and they have it in their subscript that David wrote this. I have found that there are some that think Jeremiah wrote this psalm, mostly because it's an aged man, and Jeremiah is associated with someone who hung in there a long time, had a lot of good godly wisdom. So verses 1 through 3 are the cry for help. Verses 4 through 13, he prays for deliverance, and he's confident in God because God has proven himself in his lifelong care. And in verses 14 to 24, the psalmist is resolved to keep praising and keep serving God. So this is really a good psalm, has a lot of really neat thoughts in it, and all of us should stay close to this psalm at all times. God's providential care, his unfailing providential care, helps overcome our troubles and our fears. He is very much there all the time for us. The writer's writing about himself, and he paints a somewhat sad portrait. This is somebody who suffers from the bitterness of loneliness. It's someone who has been separated from friends and someone who is experiencing hatred from his own surrounding enemies. Verses 1 through 3, I'll read verse 1. It says, "In you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame." This writer has taken refuge in God. He's old enough and wise enough to know where to turn when he needs to. Now in verses 9 and 17 and 18, we'll look at in a little bit, but they express full trust and hope in God. So don't worry about the cry for help. In verses 4 through 13, he prays for deliverance, and he prays with confidence because God has proven himself throughout his life. He has confidence that God is going to continue to minister to him. Verse 5 says this, "For you have been my hope, O sovereign Lord, my confidence since my youth." What a great testimony. The psalmist could say, I'm older now, and I'm looking way back on life. And yeah, there's been a lot of rough spots, but man, you have been there, God. You have been there all the time, and you have helped me. You have been my hope in a long relationship. And that's pretty cool. He does talk about some of the tough things he experiences. For instance, in verse 7, he says, I have become like a portent to many, but you are my strong refuge. The portent means that people avoided him and or they may have mocked him. And that's unfortunate. He was probably mocked. Can you just picture a weak, frail, old gentleman who maybe seems a little eccentric because of his strong trust in God and people mocking him or at least avoiding him? That would be sad. Maybe you're one of those who feel as though you've been avoided. Maybe not mocked, but maybe you're avoided. Others are going to forsake us. They're all going to go away at some point, but not God. God doesn't do that. And I'm thinking about people like in nursing homes and shut-ins. I have done nursing home ministry for over 40 years, and I've seen a lot of sad, lonely people in that. And I'm sure when they were younger and healthy and vibrant, they probably had a lot of pretty good relationships. And that's not to fault everybody, because some of the people may have deceased, or maybe they are incapacitated and can't do anything that helps. But I've seen a lot of lonely people. And it's terrible to be someone who is ignored and forgotten. That's a sad, sad thing. And the psalmist felt that way, but not all together. In verse 9, he says, do not cast me away when I'm old, and do not forsake me when my strength is gone. The psalmist is saying, God, you've been there all along. Let's finish together. Let's finish well and get through this. Then in verses 14 through 24, he talks about and promises that he's going to keep plugging away. God, as long as you're faithful to me, I'm going to stay faithful to you. I don't think it was conditional. He was going to stay faithful to God. There's a couple verses here that brings back to mind a story I heard. I have a really good friend, guy I've known for a long time, served a lot together, done a lot of things together. We're really good friends. His name's Ed Lewis. And I remember about 3 decades ago, him having an experience. He, if you know Ed Lewis, if you know and understand energy, you maybe know Ed Lewis. He is Mr. Energetic. I still call him the world's oldest teenager. And he is Mr. Excitement. And I can remember him coming back to one of our board meetings and telling us about an experience. He was at a church in Maryland. And he said that while he was there, the pastor said, I want you to meet somebody. And so Ed was introduced to Darlene. Now, I used the name Darlene because that's actually what it was. So anyhow, he was introduced to Darlene, and she was 78 years young. 78 years young, and she was the church's youth worker. Okay? 78, and she's the youth worker. Now, when I was in my 20s and did a lot with youth ministries, people always said, oh, how could you keep up? And I'd say, I don't keep up, I keep them in sight. And that was somewhat true. But that was about 50 years younger than what Darlene was. Anyhow, she pointed Ed to these verses here in Psalm 71, verses 17 and 18. And it says, since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. Wow, what a commitment Darlene had. I haven't heard anything from Darlene. I'm assuming she's with Jesus at this point, and I think that's pretty safe to say. But what a great verse to have. God, you have been faithful to me all my life. Since I was young, I could see your handiwork in my life. I know you were there. I have declared the great things you have done for me and for others, and I've seen your majesty and shared it with others. But as I'm getting old and as I'm getting gray and as things are winding down for me, please don't forsake me, God. But I want to declare who you are and what your power is like and your grace to the next generation. That's what I really want to do, God, so that everyone can be drawn near to you. What a great testimony of Darlene. I want to tell you that did touch and impact Ed Lewis, and it did all of us. Obviously, 3 decades later, I remember the story because it is so powerful. Graham Scroggie says this: the spirit can be young when the bones are old. That's good news. That's good news, because some of us have bones that are getting a little bit older, and we want to keep that spirit going. We want to be able to know and to serve and honor God. God never gives up on you, so you should never give up on God. Verse 19 says, your righteousness reaches to the skies, O God, and you have done great things. Who, O God, is like you? I really like the phrase about you have done great things. God has done so many great things. We tend to look at a lot of different things, different ways. Sometimes we look at our culture or those things around us and we get discouraged, and we should. It's sad what's going on in our world today. It's extremely sad, so much sadness. But we need to look at the greatness of God and who he is and what he is doing. And there are many, many things that God is doing that are so powerful, and we need to enjoy that. Who's like God? There's no one like our God. He has done great things, and you and I need to acknowledge it, and we need to give him the glory. Let's pray together. Lord, today we do want to acknowledge your greatness, and we certainly want to give you the glory for what you have done. And some of us are able to share the testimony that the psalmist had, that Darlene had, that from our youth, you have been faithful to us. You have done marvelous things in our lives, and we have seen and acknowledged that. And so as we get aged, whether we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or even beyond, may we continue to experience your closeness, your power, and your goodness and grace in our lives. We don't want to be abandoned. We don't want to feel forsaken, although you would never do that. But we want to be able to declare your righteousness even to the next generation. And Lord, you know, the next generation and the one after that and probably the one after that needs your righteousness desperately. Lord, help us to be part of that great mass of solution that brings Christ to the nations. And may he be lifted up and exalted above all else. And we pray it in his name for his glory. Amen.